Hi, welcome to the Seeking Light and Truth show. I'm Stephen Horn, and welcome to this morning's presentation. Hope everybody is having a nice day. Feel free to chime in with chat whenever you'd like. I've been talking about relationships, and I think relationships are a very important part of our health. We are social creatures, and a lot of the stress that we have in our lives comes from the problems we have in our relationships. And as I mentioned when I started this particular part of this program, I find that many times helping people develop some skills to resolve their relationship problems reduces their stress and also is part of helping them get better. I was originally going to get straight into talking about male-female relationships and marriage and that stuff, but I realized I needed to take a step back and look at a fundamental concept that that when I understood it, it's made a big difference in how I approach people and how I understand people. We have this assumption that the way we're perceiving the world, that what we're seeing, what we're hearing, what we're experiencing is the same as what someone else is seeing or hearing or experiencing. And that therefore, a lot of times we look at something and we think, oh, it's so obvious. This is so obvious. You know, why are these people being so stupid and why don't they understand and so forth? But then I went to the first conference of the International Iridology Practitioners Association, which was then NIRA, the National Iridology Research Association. And I heard Denny Johnson speak about Rayid Iridology. And I started to learn and understand Rayid Iridology. And I'd already kind of dabbled a little bit in understanding Western personality types and so forth. And I came to understand that we do not perceive the world the same way, that we actually are have different filtering systems built into this body that we inhabit that are literally filtering reality and causing us to literally see the world differently and process the world differently. And therefore, it requires understanding someone else's, getting out of your own perspective and into somebody else's perspective, and that's not always easy. And so that's basically what I wanted to do, is basically give you what I would consider to be the first understanding of how people are different, because this is a cornerstone to understanding that there are differences in the way most men and most women process the world. The way that hormones process, the hormones influence the brain and senses to develop, actually makes differences that in the way female sensory systems and brains process the world and male sensory systems and brains process the world. And while there's some overlap, there's enough of a difference that if you don't acknowledge or understand the difference, and if you're trying to think everybody should be the same, you're thinking that equality being equal means we all need to be the same. You're missing the understanding of equality. The equality is that even though we're different, we all have the same value and we all have the same rights, the same right to be respected and loved and so forth based on who we are. So I want to begin by showing you something. This is something I teach in all of my emotional healing work, that if you look at the way we're constructed, we have like three basically chambers inside of our body. And those three chambers house different organ centers. The one in our skull houses the brain and certain glands. The one in our chest cavity, which is separated from our abdominal cavity by a big muscle called the diaphragm, houses the heart and lungs. And then we have the abdominal cavity, which has our liver, our pancreas, our spleen, our intestines, our kidneys, all of those major visceral organs. And these three chambers roughly correspond to the three basic aspects of our nature. We have a head or a brain aspect to our nature where we think. It's the mental aspect or the mind component of ourselves. And then when we talk about the heart, we're usually talking about emotional, social things, giving our heart to somebody, the feeling aspect of ourselves. And then we have the guts, which are the more physical or aspect of ourselves. And we literally have three minds. I mean, we think of our brain as being only residing in our head, but our heart actually has more nerve cells than muscle cells, what I've read. And the heart actually has a mind of its own. And if you've ever fallen in love and you've lost all sense of logic, you understand that the heart can cause you to do things that are totally irrational. And it can override the brain. The heart actually has a more powerful influence on you than your brain, and can literally override your brain. And we also have a gut brain, which would be home of our instinct. And so these three worlds have been, called in various psychology things, like the parent, the partner, or the adult and the child, or the ego, superego, and id from the Freudian psychology, or I might think of as the child, the adult, and the elder. But that's ways of representing this. And this. So I did this. Coming back here for a second, this is a depiction of the Tree of Life model on the body that I use in emotional healing work. Well, I also one day when I saw that on the body, I also saw it in the way the senses work. And so I'm going to turn off my camera so you can see the whole model here. But this upper circle represents the world of the mind. This represents the world of the heart, the feeling world, and this represents the physical world. So if you look at the way our senses are constructed, we have two eyes, then we come down to one nose, then down two ears, then a mouth, and then the hands we think of as the center of the sense of touch. That's a Tree of Life model, much like these spheres right here. And it turns out that, as I'm going to explain in a minute, that the eyes are the doorway into the mental world, the primary sensory doorway to the mental world. The ears are the primary sensory doorway into the emotional world, into our heart world. And the sense of touch is the primary door into our emotional world. And the nose sits as a bridge between the mental world and the emotional world. The sense of smell is both a knowing sense of smell, and it's strongly connected to memory, but it's also an emotional smell. We have strong emotional reactions to smell. And the mouth is both tasting for physical things, but it's also, we have a lot of emotional connection with the mouth. And if you look at the head, then the upper part of the head, kind of holographically represents the world of the mind. The middle part of the face through the nose and the cheeks and over to the ears represents the emotional world and the mental world. And then the jaw represents the physical world. And you see this in caricatures. A person who's a mental type person is shown to have an egg head. Their jaw is really skinny and their head gets bigger as it goes up. So their mental world is bigger. Whereas someone who's like the brute kind of gorilla, very physical person has a smaller head on top and a great big jaw. And if you look at like the Santa Claus, the emotional jolly person, they're kind of round and wide through the cheeks with big rosy cheeks and big ears, showing that they're very emotional. So this is all kind of written on us. I also added the idea of intuition. We can receive information through the intuitive or inspirational nature. And we also have built-in knowing in our gut brain instinct. So basically, that produces three learning types. Everybody is primarily either a mental person, emotional person, or a physical person. We all are a combination of all of them. but we're all dominant in one of these things. And if we're more mentally dominant, we're a visual learner. That is, the primary way we take in the world is through our eyes. If we're more emotional, the primary way we take in the world is through our ears. And if we're kinesthetic, we primarily take in the world through touch and also through movement. And this is very important to understand because it tells you that, like, okay, for example, if you're talking to a person who's a mental person and you're talking in words, it's a very ineffective communication. You can't reach them very well. And if you're but if you communicate to them in their primary learning mode, you'll have much more success in getting messages through to them. Now, I also encountered this in a little book on relationships, marital relationship. It talked about the same three types and said it's important to know which type your partner is, because how you communicate with them and communicate love. Now, they suggested asking them some questions like, remember our first date, or what would be your dream vacation, and watching how they shift their eyes when they're thinking. When we're thinking, we tend to shift our eyes. We don't look straight ahead. We turn our eyes one direction or the other. And so you understand how this works. When we're shifting our eyes to the left eye controls the right side of the brain. So shifting to the left means you're accessing the right brain. And the right brain is the more emotional brain, and it also is the direction we go when we're trying to remember something from the past. So we tend to shift our eyes to the left when we're remembering something from the past, and we tend to shift our eyes to the left, to the right. Wait a minute, I put that on there backwards. Oh, yeah, no, I didn't. Looking to the left engages the right brain, and looking to the right engages the left brain. So if you're looking to the right, you're trying to think about something more logically. You're analyzing something, or you're projecting ahead, trying to create something for the future. Now, you will also shift your eyes slightly up, slightly or directly over, like shown in this picture, or look slightly down, depending on whether you're accessing the visual, the auditory, or the kinesthetic center of your brain. Shifting up actually activates the logical forebrain. Looking down activates the very rear part of the brain, and looking over activates the middle part of your brain. So you basically, by looking at someone's eyes, you can tell whether they're primarily a visual, auditory, or kinesthetic learner, or what level they're accessing things, So if they're trying to be more intuitive and understanding of you, and they're trying to sense what you're feeling or whatever, they'll look to the left. If they're trying to analyze what you're saying, they'll look to the right. Now, the other way that you can tell this, there are obviously psychological tests that do this, is with what I referred to earlier with Rayid Iridology, that the eye pattern reveals whether you're primarily a mental learner, a mental type and a visual learner, or a flower type, which is an emotional type or auditory learner, or the stream type, which is a physical type or a kinesthetic learner. Now, there are people who are mixtures of these, that Rayid calls shakers, which have multiple learning modes, but all shakers still have a dominant mode. We all have a primary mode, whether we're primarily mental, primarily emotional, or primarily physical. So the first type we're going to talk about is the mental type, which I call the analytical thinking type, and in Rayid they call that type a jewel. And if you look in someone's eyes and they have a lot of these little pigments, these little spots of color in their eye, on top of the other colors in their eye, that makes them a jewel type. And that means that they're a mental type person. And the characteristics of this is that mental types are, of course, very thoughtful. They approach the life primarily through their head. They're perceptive. They're visually perceptive, I should say. They see things quite well. And they're also very focused personalities. The idea of the jewel is, in order to make like a diamond, you have to put it under a lot of pressure and heat, right? You have to like concentrate it down. And so these people are very concentrated and focused. And when it comes to making a decision in life, they make that decision based on their thought, their analysis, their logic, their reasoning power, and so forth. And so they tend to be very up in their head. And of course, that, as I said, the doorway to that world is primarily the eyes. So these people are people who like to be shown things. They have a show me attitude. It's kind of a skeptical attitude about things. As Bill Cardona said to me, these people it's difficult to get them to change their mind. You really have to reason with them. You really have to present a lot of evidence to them. But once they do change their mind, they're going to stick with it. They're going to be very focused on that. In health consulting, if you have a jewel and they actually you have a relationship where they actually trust you and believe in you and want to listen to your advice, they'll very carefully take everything you say, exactly when to take it, how much to take it, and they'll follow through. They're tend to be very precise and so forth. Interestingly enough, even though they're visual learners, they're auditory communicators. They tend to use words, and they use words with precision. To them, words have very precise meaning, and so they often like big words, technical words. But when they're talking, they have very few facial expressions. So I'm going to just pull up my little camera. I remember at a presentation where a jewel was making a presentation, and they were making very teeny little marks on the chalkboard and talking in a rather monotone voice with a lot of technical stuff. And that's very typical of a jewel. They're very focused within themselves. So all these personality types actually also are better at certain tasks. I mean, obviously, a person who is a computer programmer who has to sit and pay attention to a lot of details and look at a screen, or they can be good leaders, they can be good directors, they can be good scientists, technicians, architects. Anything that requires a lot of mental acuity, a lot of mental precision, they could be very good at, and they can focus on things for a long time. They have good self-control. They like to maintain control. They don't like things to be out of control. They need to organize and classify things. But they don't like criticism, and it's again difficult to get them to change their minds or to let go of things from the past. Now, so let's say you have a jewel spouse, all right? Let's say you're married to a jewel, or you're talking to a jewel in a consult. If you want to show them something, you want to communicate in a way that engages their eyes. You can show them something from a book. You can show them a picture. You can demonstrate something. And if you want to show your love and affection for them, write them love notes. Write them little poems. Give them a greeting card. Give them something that they can see. Because their primary access point is their eyes. So whatever you're doing, engage the eyes. You need to show them visually that you love them. Okay? That could also be, if it's a woman, give her some flowers with a greeting card. So something that is visual, a visual demonstration of love. Now, if you're trying to persuade them to do something, they're not going to be persuaded if you say, well, I feel this is what we need to do, or I believe this is what we need to do. You say, I think that the right approach here is this, and here are the reasons. Well, you need to spell it out logically. You need to say, I think, because they'll pay more attention to what you think than what you feel or what you believe. All right? And if they get what you say, this is a very important thing, their response is going to be something like, huh, ah, hmm. It's a subdued response. They're not going to go like, oh, wow, oh, that's interesting. Oh, no, it's going to be, okay, something very subdued. But that will tell you that you got through to them, that they're considering what you said, that they go, that the aha light bulb is going off in their brain. All right, that's important. So now you go to the next one, the emotional spontaneous type, the flower in Rayid Iridology. This is characterized by these little rounded openings in the eye, this kind of loose weave in the eye. It's less pronounced here, but here you can see it. This is called the daisy petal eye in iridology, and you can see why it is like the daisy or the flower, and why Denny would call it the flower. Okay, so what are the flower characteristics? Flower people are emotional. They're heart people. They're flexible. They're spontaneous. They're changeable. They're creative. They're passionate. They approach life from their heart, from feelings. They make decisions based on what feels right to them or what feels good to them. All right. So it's very different than a jewel. Jewel is sitting here analyzing the pros and cons and weighing the things. This person is going off of their feeling, which can make them very spontaneous. When you're talking to flowers in a consult, they'll often be going, nodding, blah, 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 paying attention. But they can have a hard time following through because tomorrow they'll be distracted and off looking at something else. Now, they're auditory learners, so they respond very well to verbal direction and verbal encouragement, to words. This is a person that you can talk to, and they'll want to listen, and they'll hear what you're saying. But when they communicate, flowers communicate very visually. They paint pictures with the words they use, and they tend to use a lot of gestures and facial expressions and put a lot of animation into the way they speak. So unlike the jewel, who tends to be kind of rigid and have very limited gestures, they have a lot of gestures, and their perspective is more about looking at everybody else around them. Now, this obviously means that they do well in anything that requires creativity and self-expression. Inventors, authors, dancers, musicians, writers. They can also be teachers and things like that. But it's something where they are able to be creative and express themselves. Now, they may, because their orientation is more towards others and not so internally focused, they may be overly dependent on external praise and recognition for self-worth, especially if they're an extroverted flower type. And they may feel very depressed if they aren't able to be creative. Now, I have, for example, I had a flower personality come into my office one time, and he was so stressed and hated his job. He was a flower personality, and he was an accountant by profession, and he couldn't stand having to work with all that detail and all those numbers and everything. He was really not in a in a field that suited his personality. See, I believe that everybody, God has given you a personality and certain strengths and certain weaknesses, and you're going to do best in life if you're able to recognize your innate nature and talents and use that for the benefit of other people around you. Flowers are not very good with follow-through. They're too easily distracted. And they don't do well with rigid structures, and they tend to see a big picture and not like hate getting lost in details, right? So give me the big picture, but ignore the details. So if you're wanting to communicate with a flower, talk to them or give them something to listen to. Listen to this, audio program or listen to this piece of music or something. Flowers need a lot of positive verbal feedback. They're very sensitive to negative verbal feedback. If you're saying negative things about them, it really affects them very deeply. So try to be positive, encouraging, and you want to say, if you're in a relationship with a flower, I love you, verbally often, or say you're wonderful, or nice positive things to your partner all the time to show them love. They'll respond very well to that. Now, if you want to motivate them, they're not going to be motivated by what you think. They're going to be motivated by what you feel. So you say, honey, I feel that this is what we should do. Now this is what's tricky about this is understand, if you're a jewel and your partner's a flower, right? Then the flower has to come and approach the jewel from a thinking perspective, and the jewel has to approach the flower from a feeling perspective. Part of the reason we're drawn into relationships is to balance each other out. And the most passionate relationships, the relationships that have the most really raw magnetic attraction, are opposites. We think we're attracted to people because they're like us. And in truth, we're attracted because they're complementary to us. They're the North Pole magnet, and we're the South Pole magnet, and that is what creates that sucks you together. You're actually not that attracted to people that are too much like you, because that means that you feel in competition with them who's the best. Friends can sort of do that, but in real intimate relationships, which also includes not just in marriage, but also like if you're working with people in business, people who are too much like you, you're going to want to be competitive with rather than cooperative with. Whereas people who are different than you can actually learn to cooperate and make the team better than either individual. So to motivate them, you say, well, I feel, that this is the right choice. That's what I feel. Now, if you get through to them, if you excite them, motivate them, stimulate them, whatever, they'll go, wow, oh, ooh, oh. The O sound is very prominent. So the ah is more mental. The O, in fact, if you say it, ah, you'll feel it vibrates up in your head. If you go, oh, you'll feel it vibrates in your chest. So the O is the sound coming from the heart, from the chest. So, my wife will say something to me like, tell me something bad that's happened or whatever. And I'll go, oh, okay. And she goes, it's not okay. And I go, and I've had to try to explain to her, it's just, okay means, oh, I heard you. K, I'm thinking about it. That's what it really means. I got it. Yeah, I'm thinking about it. Sounds actually have intrinsic meaning, which is a really interesting topic for a different discussion. Now, the other type, third type, is the physical type, the active kinesthetic type, and it's characterized by nice straight eye fibers and the absence of those little rounded openings and the absence of the pigmented spots. And the idea of the stream is this is a flowing personality. Streams are very grounded. In other words, they're very embodied, they're very connected into the physical world, they're very stable, and they're very intuitively sensitive. They make their decisions based either on experience or on instinct, gut instinct. That's different than feeling. It's a sense of what's right, not a feeling for what's right. Streams can learn both visually and auditorily, but they actually learn primarily from touch. Okay, so streams love to put their hands on things, to actually get physically involved with things. They learn by apprenticeship is basically the way you would say that. And they communicate through movement. They communicate with action. They do things. So they learn through hands-on experience, and they communicate with action. They do things. They get things done. Their posture also communicates and so forth, and they have a we perspective. Streams are very inclusive. They're wanting to create unity with themselves and others. Streams like to be physically active. They're good implementers. They're good at doing just about anything that requires getting the job done. If you have a job and you need it to be done, streams are really good at actually following through and getting things done. They're empathetic with other people. They're good mediators. They help try to balance the extremes. They sit kind of in the middle between the active kinesthetic they sit in the middle between the analytical thinking or jewel type and the emotional feeling flower type, and they're good at mediating both ends of the spectrum. Okay. One of the biggest trouble with stream personalities is they have a hard time recognizing their own limits. They often push themselves too hard and take on more than they can handle, because they sometimes have kind of like a Superman kind of thing. So how do you communicate with a stream? You do something for them, with them, or for them. You want to communicate love to a stream personality. You show them love through action. You touch them, you hold their hands, you give them a massage, you cuddle them, or you do something for them. That also is helpful. And how you motivate them is in terms of belief. I believe, that's my inner sense of my belief is a combination of mental and emotional together. I believe that, the right course here, or the thing to do here, or whatever, and that is going to get through to them more than anything else. And if you get through to a stream, they're going to go, Think about when you, and if you do the sound, it vibrates way down in your belly. In fact, it's interesting because you got the, let me turn on the camera and pause the picture for a minute. So if you think about it, you've got the is like the sound of all three of those things. And think about it. If someone starts rubbing your shoulders and you start feeling really good, you go, that's your body talking, right? Whereas, oh, wow, oh, that's your heart talking, like really, and you're going, aha, yeah, that's your head, your reason talking. So anyway, come back to the slide presentation. So now the mixed type, I call the extremist innovative type, and Denny calls them shakers in Rayid. They're characterized by the fact that they have both the rounded openings and the spots. So you see this one has a lot of rounded openings, but a some spots. This one has more spots and a few rounded openings. Shakers are mixed learning types. I like to say that a shaker is someone whose head and heart are constantly in conflict. There's an inner struggle to reconcile head and heart. And shakers are very restless, they're very progressive, they're very dynamic, and they're never fully content with the status quo. They're always exploring the cutting edge of everything. And they tend to vacillate a lot in decision making. They have a harder time making decisions because they're of the inner conflict. But because of that inner conflict, they're always exploring, trying to discover new things. They learn by doing. The primary thing that they do, rather than learn by touching and experiencing, they learn by just jumping in with both feet and starting to try to figure out how to do it. In other words, trial and error. They're both visual and auditory communicators. So they tend to be good with both words and pictures in terms of communicating to other people. And they have a they perspective, meaning they're thinking about big issues and everything's going out in the world. Now, all shakers will have a dominant characteristic. They'll either be a shaker jewel, a shaker flower, or a shaker stream. So in other words, they're always going to have a secondary characteristic, and that is their primary learning mode. Although they have their primary communication mode, although they have other communication modes. So they're driven to achieve. They do well as inventors, motivators, explorers, and leaders of a cause. They like to be physically active and dislike being confined or feeling like they have a lot of restrictions on them. They really want independence. And their biggest struggle in life is learning balance, learning how not to be running off in one direction and then running off in the other direction, and to really get focused and follow things through. So if you're communicating with a shaker, then you have to use their dominant communication mode. You have to figure out whether they're a flower shaker, or whether they're a stream shaker, or whether they're a jewel shaker, and use those same techniques to motivate them. But one of the things that really motivates jewels is give them a problem to solve. Don't tell them how to solve it. Just say, here, there's this problem. I don't know how to solve it. Do you have any ideas? And man, that they love that. Just love figuring out how to solve problems and tackle things. And of course, their positive response will align with their dominant mode. That they'll be more or oh or depending on what they are. Now, realize that everybody is a complex mixture of these things. So we're looking at kind of the extremes of all these personalities. You could have a stream jewel or a stream flower, or like say a shaker jewel or a shaker flower, or so forth. You could have different people or different mixes of these characteristics, but we all have a dominant mode. And one of the important things to understand is, again, that in energetics, opposites attract. Now, this is important to understand because people who are trying to level the differences between the sexes, who are basically saying that all of the differences between men and women are based on cultural conditioning and none of it are inherent, are doing a huge disservice to relationships. I bought into that BS and propaganda for a long time and had horrible problems in relationships. Once I accepted the fact that women don't think the way I do, and they're never going to think the way I do, and I just have to accept that women think and perceive the world differently than I do, and have to acknowledge that I think and perceive the world differently than them, and that's okay. I don't have to be something I'm not in order to try to please someone. So, but to understand that the more polar the energies are, the greater the attraction. So in other words, the more polarized the magnetism, the greater the passion, the what we call chemistry that takes place in relationships. And so the most common pairings for really passionate relationships are the flower paired with the jewel, okay? Because the flower communicates visually and the jewel receives visually. The jewel communicates verbally, the flower inputs verbally or auditorily. Jewels help stabilize and ground flowers so that the flower, who tends to be very imaginative, creative, spontaneous, and so forth, needs someone who, pulls them back, makes them think, reins in some of their impulses and so forth. But at the same time, jewels tend to be kind of stick in the mud kind of personalities and maybe not the best socially or whatever. And flowers inspire them and motivate them and give them ideas. So why I think this is so important. I'll let me do the shaker stream, and then I'll talk about why it's so important. So shakers give out auditory and visual output, and streams have auditory and visual input. Streams have a kinesthetic output, and jewels have a kinesthetic input. So when I say kinesthetic, that's touch. Streams communicate a lot by touch, and jewels receive a lot by touch. Streams help to balance and organize shakers, because streams are very good at mediating the extremes, getting things done, and so forth, whereas shakers provide excitement and innovation for streams. Now, of course, if a person, say, was a stream that was a little bit flower, they would probably be attracted to a shaker who's a little bit jewel, who's jewel. So the attraction is a lot more than just that simplicity. But the reason that is important to understand is because it explains the simple fact that we don't see the world the same way. As this little picture shows you, two figures looking at the same thing on the ground, and one of them sees 9 and the other sees 6 because of their perspective or point of view. And so both of them are right. These different personality types are literally not perceiving the same thing. A person who's a very visual person sees a lot of things that a person who's more auditory will never see. They just don't have the brain and the sensory system to do it. It's hard for them to do it. Whereas the person who's the flower is going to pick up on things that the other person may be missing, emotionally or whatnot. And if you do this and you have respect for the fact that people are different, that they have a different perspective, and you learn how to understand and work with people that are different than you, not just in your marriage, but in work or whatever, by listening and trying to see how they're perceiving the world versus how you're perceiving the world, then you can go a long way in improving relationships. Like I said, it's a big disservice to think that everybody processes the world the same way. And I really like this cartoon as a kind of a final thing of that. Over here you have our blessed homeland and their barbarous wastes, our glorious leader and their wicked despot, our great religion and their primitive superstition, our noble populace and their backward savages, our heroic adventurers and their brutish invaders. The perspective is often this us versus them thing, and that pitting people against each other, rich versus poor, male versus female, blacks versus white, or whatever that is, creates this polarity and division. And in relationships, we have to get out of that. We have to be able to start looking at it from the other side, not just our own side, and really take care of that. So you can see that, like, for example, let me give you a couple pragmatic examples of this. Some years back, in a previous marriage, I had a stepson who was a very kinesthetic kid. He was not a very good auditory learner. He was not a very good visual learner. So he saw the odometer on the car, and he asked, what was that? And when I tried to explain it to him, he got really, like he usually did, he got really frustrated and whatever. So when I got home, I got a yardstick, and I laid it on the floor, and I got one of his toy cars, and I literally demonstrated to him how the car drove 1 inch, 2 inches, 3 inches, and made a little fake odometer and showed him, okay, so the car went 3 inches, and so the thing spins around to 3, and then when it gets up higher, and he got it, because he had to get involved in the actual pragmatism of it to be able to understand the words. I'm married to a person who's a little bit, she's got a little bit, she's got some flower in her, but she's definitely more kinesthetic than I am, and a bit more analytical, more detail oriented. And I'm a flower shaker. So she's very practical, very down to earth, very action oriented. I'm very much into ideas and creativity and that sort of thing. So she's grounding to me. It's frustrating sometimes because, her pragmatism is like very different than my, optimism and so on and so forth. But because I understand this dynamics of relationship, and I understand that that the whole purpose of relationship like this isn't to just have fun, just that all is just going to be rosy and everything. It's actually to challenge your personality to grow and develop and to balance you out. And so as frustrating as it is sometimes to have that happening, you need to recognize that that's the dynamic. Marriage is not a rosy, wonderful thing like we think of it when we're young. It's actually a crucible of spiritual, mental, and emotional growth. And that's made a big difference for me in understanding that thing. Yeah, I'm a shaker flower. So you can see when I talk, I mean, especially when I stand on stage, I use big gestures. I'm very the forefront. I'm curious about everything, but my dominant mode in learning is auditory. I learn very well through auditory input. I can read, and I do read, but I tend to skim read. And when I'm reading, I tend to actually be reading aloud in my head. So I'm converting it to auditory information. Also, I might mention that I love getting audiobooks and listening to them in the car. So I'm, again, constantly curious, interested in things. That's a shaker definition, out on the forefront of things. But I'm primarily auditory. And if you want to get through to me, you say something nice to me or encouraging to me. That means a lot. I don't know why, but it touches my heart. I'm also underneath that, I'm quite kinesthetic. I'm an action-oriented person, and I also have to say something else. I'm not an analytical type because I'm no good at details. I hate doing all the stuff where you have to document the research and put in the citations and and all the little details. I'm interested in the big picture. That's why I create, big pictures like the disease tree and models and everything to teach overarching principles rather than get caught up in the little nitty gritties of how, you apply this and apply that and everything else like that. That's a shaker personality. Whereas someone who's more analytical would love doing that kind of research and documenting and footnoting and everything else like that and so forth. Yeah, and if here's the thing: if you have to understand that like someone said, the husband can't tell him anything; you have to show it. See, your tendency is going to be to judge them and say, "What's wrong with you?" Well, nothing's wrong with them. This is what you've got to get through your head. Because a person does not learn well auditorily or visually, and they're learning primarily kinesthetically, there's nothing wrong with that. It just means that maybe it causes you to have to grow and learn new skills to be able to communicate with that. And if you look at relationships that way, it polishes and develops your personality, because it's literally what I came to understand is it's not that anybody's stupid. It's not that they're not a good learner. It's that some people are that our brain and sensory system gets wired somehow in the womb and in the way we're put together genetically, that we are better at getting information through certain tech methods than other methods. And if we can sit there and be frustrated that a person maybe isn't a good listener, or we can learn how to figure out how to communicate to them in a way that they do get it. That's the choice, right? And so if you learn to understand that you're going to be attracted to someone who is different than you, because that's what makes the best chemistry, all right? And therefore you have to learn to understand and work within those differences. And that, getting that basic understanding of what I laid out today will lead into what I'm going to talk about next time, of all the research about the difference between the sensory systems of men and women and the wiring of the brains in men and women. Because when I finally understood that, it made all the difference in the world in terms of relationships. I don't expect a woman to think the way I do. And I also don't expect that, and I also am less bothered when my wife is upset at my acting like a man, because I realize I'm a man, and that's okay that I'm a man, if that makes sense. And a man doesn't have to be like a woman, okay? In fact, the less I am like a woman, the more attraction there is between me and my partner, even though it's frustrating. That's an interesting thing. Flower types are more adaptable. They're more emotionally adaptable. They are more resilient emotionally to setbacks in life, to disappointments, to failures, to other things, to changing circumstances and so forth. They are the most adaptable of all the types, the flowers. They're physically weaker than other types. They're of those types, they have the most physical health problems because their body isn't as strong, but their emotions are more powerful. Whereas, interestingly enough, the reverse is true of a stream. A stream tends to have a very strong body, but they're not very emotionally resilient. Their biggest problem is it's hard for them to let go of anything, let anything fall through the cracks, leave anything undone, and therefore they get really stressed and anxious and frustrated with change and so forth. And one of their biggest weaknesses is they can get really stressed and anxious and nervous and so forth because it's hard for them to let go of things. So each type has strengths and each type has weaknesses. And I've all pondered this from a kind of a metaphysical point of view, and that is, it's like we're all different and we have these strengths and weaknesses, which forces us, in order to be whole, we have to team up with other people who are strong where we're weak and weak where we're strong, and learn how to work together. And that's what makes the greatest advance, is when we are able to work with people who are really opposite of us. Thanks for the feedback about learning to communicate better, because that's what I really want, to if you start to understand this, it just helps you build better relationships. And that's the goal here. Is, what I found is this. All right. And this is coming a little bit of wisdom from the mistakes of Stephen Horn. You're in a relationship, you run into these conflicts and whatever, and you get divorced, all right? Because you think it's your partner. But then what happens is you get into another relationship, and you know what? It becomes the same dynamic. Why? Because you're the same personality and you're attracted to the opposite personality. And the same issues come up again because you can't run away from yourself, because you are who you are, and you will encounter these issues with other people in your life over and over and over again until you learn to resolve them. You can't just run away from them hoping to find somebody different to interact with. You have to tackle and realize that this is part of the dynamic of who you are, and therefore who you are attracted to because of who you are. Yeah, and thank you, comment about daughter, because obviously each of your children has a dominant learning mode. And one of the things that we have a problem with in public education is we cater very much to auditory or visual learners, but we have a much harder time with kinesthetic or mixed learning types, shaker types, who often do have problems in school because they have a hard time sitting still, or they get bored more easily. So it's very important to understand that dynamic of things. Now, before I run out of time here, again, thank you for being part of the Seeking Light and Truth show. This will be posted up on YouTube, hopefully tomorrow, maybe later today. And so if you enjoyed this video, please go like it on YouTube and share it with other people on social media, so we can get this message out to more people who need to hear these things. For those who are watching on YouTube or other platform, if you'd like to attend the live broadcasts, the URL for signing up for the live broadcast is down below. If you stopped getting notifications for the live broadcast and have signed up, try signing up again, because apparently if you haven't attended or viewed one of the recordings after 3 months, it drops you off the list. So didn't know that when I set this up, or I'd have set it up a little bit differently. I also would like to tell you that at stephenhorn.com, I will be posting all these videos and including the handouts. So you'll be able to find them there, and I will put the URL to those on my YouTube channel. You can visit stephenhorn.com to join our mailing list and get news about our courses, books, and materials. You can also join our member program to get our monthly member webinars, access to our online database of hundreds of health problems and products and things that can help with them, and also get discounts on our other products and courses. And you can check out our store for various charts, like these emotional healing charts. Soon coming out with an herbal energetics chart and a little herbal energetics book. And so there are tools and resources we have to help you with your health. Okay, so thank you so much for being part of this program and for supporting us. What I hope is that you will take some time to start looking in the eyes and start watching the eyes, like watch me think. I'm going to just think about when I got married to my wife, and notice how my eyes shift. Okay, I actually one of my wives would get mad at me because I'd be listening to her and I'd actually tilt my head a certain way and be looking at her kind of like this. And what's interesting is she was thinking that I was like being really mean for her, but honestly, I think my tendency is when I'm doing that, I'm actually shifting to the left a little bit, which means I was actually trying to use my right brain to understand her emotions. I was really trying to be empathetic with her, and she interpreted it as something that, I was like analyzing. Now, if I was analyzing her, I'd be looking at her the other way. Anyway, so, but it's an interesting thing. Start watching it, start looking at it, and actually put this into practice, and you'll be as you get skills with understanding other people and how to work with them, it will really improve everything in your life. Thanks again for being part of our program. Goodbye.